The South Hackney Picture Palace, built by Francis Bliss and Thomas Holden, opened in 1913 on the corner of Casland Road and Wells Street. At a time when, as Alistair O'Neill notes, the pace of invention accelerated the speeding of modern life in London, these first purpose-built cinemas were exotic and enticing, offering comfort and luxury in marked contrast to the hastily converted shops, halls and railway arches of the early hundreds, with their bijou proportions and painted-over windows. In the only photograph I can find of South Hackney's Picture Palace, it appears to be a modest-sized building akin to an exotic circus tent or a small pavilion, its roof rising to a point topped by a flag and looped by bunting. Its jaunty looks are shared by other early cinemas, such as the Electric Palace in Harwich and the Coliseum in Stoke Newington. And here, with a spoiler alert, I will jump ahead because the South Hackney Picture Palace, or theatre, or simply the South, no longer exists. It was demolished in 1956 and is not remembered at all in accounts of historic Hackney or cinema history. Walter Benjamin believed that objects from the historic past should collide with others in the contemporary order to create new insights into the present and offer an understanding of what has gone before. With this in mind, I will meander through a story with a beginning, end, and future. Cinema was initially called the Poor Man's Theatre, and the shop shows and very first cinemas were predominantly located in the poorer London boroughs. By 1913, the upper middle class population of South Hackney had begun to migrate to the more salubrious Stamford Hill, and overcrowding and bad housing became political issues in the mixed population of the borough. It was against this backdrop of social upheaval that the picture palaces and electric cinemas appeared, rapidly expanding into the upper working class and lower middle class boroughs such as Hackney. This process of bourgeoisification initiated a rush of investors keen to cash into this latest of pop entertainments. Alongside the South, 41 other cinemas opened in August 1913 in Great Britain, and by 1914 there were 474 cinemas in London alone, each showing continuous programmes to audiences of men, women and children. Cinemas were cheap to visit, and despite the suspicion that they encourage immorality, with staff reportedly turning a blind eye to sexual behaviour going on in the darkness of the auditorium, they were generally safe spaces for the family to gather and escape the often harsh conditions at home. Tickets at the South cost as little as twopence, with children half price. The proprietor of a Limehouse cinema recorded seeing a woman peeling potatoes in his auditorium, the peel mingling with the nutshells and orange peel that littered the floor. Before and alongside early cinema, the dominating popular entertainment was the music hall, which had a rowdy, interactive, mostly male audience. The proclaimed queen of the halls, Marie Lloyd, was born in Hoxton in 1870 and spent time making babies' boots and curling feathers for hats before deciding upon a career on the stage. Aged 16, she appeared at the Seabright Music Hall off the Hackney Road, which bore the inscription, "Let the evening's enjoyment bear the morning's reflection," above the stage. After her successful stint at the Seabright, Marie Lloyd took her double entendre-infused songs to the West End, where she accompanied her singing with skirt dancing. This involved manipulating long, layered skirts to create a motion of flowing fabric, often in a darkened theatre with coloured light projections highlighting the patterns of the skirt. Alongside the acts on the music hall bills of the early hundreds were short projected films, the starting burble of cinema. Catching sight of the shimmering translucence of projected images would have been tantamount to seeing ghosts. By 1910, the Seabright Music Hall was the Seabright Picture Palace, and in 1912, a year before he was involved in the opening of the South, Francis Bliss was its listed licensee. Between the music hall and the cinema, another popular entertainment took hold: roller skating. In 1909, spectators rushed to build rinks to take advantage of what seemed to be a watertight moneymaker. In March 1909, rinking companies were being registered at the rate of one a day, with major venues attracting 5,000 at weekends. By 1910, the craze was over, causing the bankruptcy of hundreds of rinking companies and leaving disused sites and building shells, venues available to be leased to investors in the next boom, cinema. The premier skating rink opened in Lower Clapton Road in December 1909. Less than a year later, plans to turn the rink into a cinema were already being discussed, and the Rink Cinema opened in 1911. On the 23rd of August 1913, the Hackney Gazette congratulated the South for the excellence of its programme, notably the 6-minute comedy Hide and Seek, starring Mabel Normand, which was shown alongside 7 other films. Normand was a sensation of early cinema, a tiny, curvaceous woman with huge eyes who liked to eat ice cream for breakfast, and in the words of Janine Bassinger, could ride a horse, drive a car, fall on her butt, clamber over a rooftop, and still look like $1 million. The first 15 years of the 20th century, writes Peter Bailey, saw a glamorisation of women in the capital. In Hackney in 1913, the Sunday monkey parade on Mare Street was where, as historian David Mander describes, the young would show off their fine clothes, the girls in showy costumes of petunia, violet and sky blue hues. This explosion of showing off was surely inspired by the cinema, where colour-enhanced newsreels documenting the latest Paris fashions could be seen alongside the war reports, melodramas and comedies. In 1913, a journalist who saw a filmed fashion show of Paul Poiret's work described the models drifting across the screen as goddesses from a machine. One of the most famous designers of the era was Lucille, also known as Lady Duff Gordon. Whose glamorous outfits were worn by actresses and aristocrats. Cecil Beaton described her clothes, which were sheer and body-hugging, as being made of delicately sprinkled soft materials with bead or sequin embroidery, which created an indefinable shimmer, as if illuminated by electric light, turning women into flickering images. Lucille recruited working-class girls as her models, exotically renaming them Camilla and Hebe, emphasising the theatricality and transformative nature of dressing up. For the young women that visited the picture palaces, dress became a form of subterfuge, a way to break away from rigid restrictions of class and status. And it is no wonder that George Bernard Shaw's stage version of the Pygmalion myth, which premiered in 1914, became his biggest hit and has been reworked over and over again. Before the start of World War I, many American actors and directors came over to the UK to ply their trade, making films for companies such as London Film Productions. These included actress Edna Flugrath, one of 3 Silent Star sisters, and her future husband Harold Shaw. By 1914, the South boasted the finest 3-pence seats in London, from which you could watch the feature-length films of 4 or more reels that were increasingly replacing the 10-minute one-reelers. These included The Blood Ruby, Saints and Sinners, and the great British production Bootle's Baby, in which Flugrath, directed by Shaw, plants her secret baby with the wrong man, but ends up marrying him anyway. These films, along with much silent film output and the stars that appeared in them, are now lost and all but forgotten. Frampton Park, the area to the north of Wells Street, was named for the Frampton family, who owned a good chunk of Hackney at a period when it was mainly fields. Some of the family are buried in St Thomas's burial ground on Wells Street. Their tomb is one of the few still remaining in what is a scrubby bit of green, best known as the place where 14-year-old Shaquille Smith was stabbed and killed as he sat with friends one evening in 2008. In 1913, Wells Street had shops and pubs on both sides of the street, including the Green Dragon, which traded from 1732 until 1956, and is visible in my only remaining image of the South. Early cinemas, unless they were rebuilt or enlarged, were often destined to become flea pits. Their cramped facilities and outmoded looks could not compete with the new cinemas of the 1920s and 1930s, which also took the best new films away from them. The South managed to weather the storm of World War I and was taken over by Charles Spencer in 1925, who did some improvements, including adding a band pit. However, by December 1930, the cinema is not listed at all in the weekly Kinema Guide, and the trail goes cold, until it was taken over by the Odeon Group, emerging in 1937 after alterations by the Dalston-born architect George Coles. This new incarnation came at a time when cinema-going was at a golden age of Hollywood peak. In 1939, 2 days after Britain declared war on Germany, a government order closed all places of public entertainment, including the country's 4,300 cinemas. George Bernard Shaw, in a letter to the Times, described this as a masterstroke of unimaginative stupidity, and the unpopular order was soon revoked, and the cinema reopened. The population, it seems, was happy to trade the danger from bombs for a few hours of escapist entertainment. One of the few traces of the South is in advertisements in the Hackney Gazette. In 1913, actors' names were not included on publicity material, but by 1941, the cinema revolved around stars, with a whole industry built up to provide information to an audience hungry to know more about the people that they emulated and dreamed of. The films shown at the South in early 1941 made it apparent that it was not a prestige theatre. They didn't show the films that have lasted and are still talked about. Instead, the headliners tended to be films like I Want a Divorce, starring Joan Blondell, a slap-happy comedy of young love, or The Man I Married, where Joan Bennett, according to New York Times reviewer Bosley Crowther, does little more than model dresses and express incredulity, or Too Many Girls, the silly film, which is most notable as the one where Lucille Ball first meets Desi Arnaz. These films may have been second-rate, but the stars still looked great, beautifully dressed and made up. This was reflected in fan magazines such as Picture Goer, which, despite wartime austerity, maintained full-colour covers featuring mainly female Hollywood stars. The government had decided that appearance was important and thus kept makeup off the ration. The Picture Goer covers tended to be head and shoulders with a focus on hair and makeup, because in wartime, as Angus Calder has observed, beneath the neck, fashion was almost impossible. Sociologist Pearl Jeffcott, in a study of working-class women who came of age in the mid-1940s, noticed that the appearance of stars was key to their interest in films. She noted, the amazing extent to which the minutiae of the clothes and the hair arrangement of an American actress may affect the spending habits of a girl in a tenement in London. This, Jeffcott made clear, was not just idle interest, but was driven by their belief that a poor girl's appearance is her main stock in trade, and one of the few areas of life over which working-class girls had control and could be self-determining. The film, advertised at the South in the Hackney Gazette of 18th of April 1941, was Quiet Wedding, a buttoned-up British affair co-written by Terence Rattigan and starring the charming brunette Margaret Lockwood. The New York Times, with interventionism in mind, gushed that Quiet Wedding was a glowing tribute to the resolute calm of the British, with, they note, its production being halted 5 times by Nazi bombs falling on the studio. This 18th of April listing is, however, a ghastly projection of a performance that never was, because by this date the cinema had already closed. On the 16th of April 1941, at the height of the Blitz, a bomb exploded in Frampton Park. The South was damaged, and although the building survived, it would never show another film. The Hackney Gazette does not report the South's closure. Bomb damage reports were bad for wartime morale. The only evidence of the cinema's demise is the Showing at Your Odeon advertisement published on the 21st of April, which only lists the Hackney Road Odeon. The South is never mentioned again. So the unfortunate South was never able to take advantage of the cinema boom of the remaining war years and instead became a furniture store, before eventually being demolished in 1956 to make way for a sprawling Hackney Council housing project, the Frampton Park Estate. The longevity of cinema, over 100 years and counting, has created its own folklore, and many of the cinemas from the boom years of the 20th century have become ghostly presences with little left to prove that they were once much visited beacons of modernity. Over 70 cinemas have opened and closed in Hackney since 1909. By the end of the 1980s, thwarted by home video and a downturn in economic fortune, the Rio in Dalston was the last Hackney cinema standing. But the sweeping gentrification, so hated by East London's creative communities, has had one positive outcome. The once ubiquitous cinemas have started to return, catering to a new wave of young incomers hungry for shared experiences in an environment oversaturated with personal entertainments. The new cinemas, such as the multi-screen Hackney Picture House, converted from the old library, and multi-purpose, the Institute of Light, a railway arch by London Fields, are very welcome. They have not, however, completely exorcised the haunting presence of the ghost cinemas of the borough, such as the Regal on Mare Street, which opened in 1936 with an auditorium decorated in pink plastic paint with a touch of mauve, green and biscuit colour, with seating of light oak upholstered in orange with green armrests. In 1982, the Regal, by then called the Mayfair, closed, becoming a snooker hall for a while before being demolished and replaced by an Iceland supermarket in 2000, an ignoble fate for a once so glamorous building. It is the sheer unremarkableness of the South that makes me want to know more about it, but its lack of physical presence in an unfashionable site hinders any chance of its resurrection. The city, after all, has little time for sentimentality. It's an ever-moving organism, and there is change and evolve to cater for the needs of their inhabitants. But some ghosts do come back to life. The Castle Cinema in Brooksby's Walk, E9, first opened as the Castle Electric in 1913 and shut its doors in 1958. Since then it's been a bingo hall, a shoe factory and a snooker club. Today the building is carved in two. Downstairs is an upmarket spa, supermarket and burger bar. Upstairs, renovated over the last 12 months by two young entrepreneurs, is the newly opened aubergine and gold 80-seater Castle Cinema. In February 2017, the first film screened for an audience at the Castle since 1958 was, appropriately enough, La La Land, a film about cinema's dreamland for a dream-like cinema resurrection.